My name is Nate. Welcome to the DivMan channel. Today we're going to talk about why MSTY, the Yieldmax MSTR option income strategy ETF, is my favorite ETF, or I could say it this way. This is the big return ETF. This is the show me the money ETF. This is the ETF that pays its divs and somehow manages to keep your capital positive in the underlying asset. So this is the website for MSTY, and let's just go to show here why there is such an insane talk around this fund. And really what it comes down to is that MSTY is paying dividends of $4 per share, $2 per $2.50 per share, $3 per share, $2.33 per share. The lowest amount it's paid is $1.85 per share, and this is for a fund that is like, it started out at $20 per share. Okay, so day one it was $20 per share. Today it's $28 per share. So this fund is pretty cool, and I just want to talk about why I think that MSTY is actually a good investment. Obviously, with a covered call single fund, single stock ETF, I guess you could say, MSTR is pretty much the only thing they're investing in, aside from maybe a little bit in treasury bills or something like that to hold some cash. This fund is holding almost $2 billion in assets under management. And so this fund is just so extraordinary, and really the reason that this fund performs so well is because the covered call strategy really benefits from, one, volatility, and two, price appreciation. And really, there's no greater example of this than MSTR MicroStrategy, the company founded by Michael Saylor. Now, why is MSTR such a bullish bet, and why is MSTY, as a result, a bullish bet? Well, here is, Bitcoin, and over 5 years, so over the last 5 years, it's increased over 1,000%. And over the last 5 years, 1,000%. Over the last year, over 100%. Year to date, it's a little bit, looks a little red here. It's telling me it's 0.5% up. Over the last 6 months, it's increased 44%. A lot of that flows out of the bullishness about Donald Trump and the potential Bitcoin strategic reserve. So the United States might just hold Bitcoin in perpetuity to be able to back the US dollar, to back the United States interests, to have a big slice of the kind of Bitcoin scheme. I don't want to call it a Ponzi scheme. It's not really a Ponzi scheme. This is how money was supposed to be. It's supposed to be rare. It's supposed to be usable. It's supposed to be all these things that Bitcoin does. In any case, Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy saw his company not really, one, able to hold its treasury assets, so its cash, very well. Its cash was dwindling in value because the Fed keeps printing. So in 2020, Michael Saylor decided to start buying Bitcoin. This is, all these green dots are the Bitcoin buys of Michael Saylor. And so he made a few Bitcoin purchases here when Bitcoin was at around $10,000. Now, since then, he's bought at pretty much every price level that Bitcoin has been at, except the very top back here, but he ended up, buying more over here. So, the reason that MSTR has such a volatile stock, and especially on the upside, is because when Bitcoin goes up, MSTR goes up more percentage-wise. So the real cool thing about the MSTY strategy is they do covered calls, and so long as they win those calls, they end up with quite a big yield off of those calls. Now, as far as the performance of MSTY, here is a cool little high yield spreadsheet that someone designed in a Discord that I'm a part of through someone called Retire on Dividends, also another YouTuber. And if you see here, this is MSTY as compared to a bunch of high yield funds. Its yield on cost is 129%. And it gives a few price projections for what you would need to put into the fund to make a certain amount of money in dividends per month, approximately. So if you wanted to make $1,000 per month, you would need only about $7,300 in investing in that fund. That's pretty crazy. $7,300 gets you about $1,000 per month on average. It's doing some averaging, some math to try to figure it out. So it's not guaranteed, but approximately that's the case. To get $2,500 per month, you would need $18,000 in capital invested in the fund. If you wanted $5,000 a month, you would need $36,000 invested. And for every dollar that you invest in MSTY, you end up with a dividend of 10 cents and 0.8 of a cent. So this ends up being a very cost-effective way to get a high yield. Now, here's the price chart here for MSTY. Remember that this fund is paying out dividends, so it's not showing you the total return here. It's just showing you the cost per share. They siphon out something from this price here every single month, and yet it's still positive, first of all, which is impressive for Yieldmax. It's never really dipped back down. Maybe once back in September of last year. It dipped below the starting price for when the fund was introduced. But nevertheless, you still have over 40% gain for the year. Now, this isn't quite as much as MSTR, but MSTR doesn't really pay a dividend. So this allows you to get some yield for just holding the fund. Now, here's kind of the breakdown of what MSTY is doing, MSTR, and then the S&P VOO, and then NASDAQ QQQ. And MSTY is total return, that's including dividends, 218% since inception. Hasn't quite been a year since it was incepted. MSTR has 350%. Now, the reason MSTR has a better total increase is because there is a little bit of inefficiency in the price movement of MSTY versus MSTR. That's just how the covered call strategy works. On the upside, you don't get quite as much upside, but on the downside, you also don't get as much downside as the underlying, usually. And here you see total return for VOO for 1 year is, this doesn't actually look right. This should be closer to 30-ish%. I don't know what's up with that number, but that doesn't seem quite right. Maybe that's with the dip recently. I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure that VOO and QQQ were closer to. I'm just going to pull it up just for the sake of it. With that, that calculator was not quite as accurate, I think. So we're just going to check that number. Yeah, so VOO is doing about 20% for the 1 year return. QQQ is doing about 23%. Let's look at MSTR again, just the underlying. MSTR 1 year is actually 444%. So it's also a great idea to hold some MSTR in addition to MSTY. And if you had bought MSTY at its inception, so the Yieldmax high yield fund, you would have, for every $20 that you put in the original starting price of the fund, you would have $27 in dividends. And let's see here, MSTY. This is how much your shares would be worth. Each share would be worth 28. So you put in, If you put in $20, you would have $28 in total appreciation, plus you would have $27 in your pocket, doing whatever you want to do with it, just having been siphoned out of that fund. That's pretty incredible for a high yield fund. Now, here is like a back test of the different funds. This is MSTY, MSTR, VOO, QQQ. And this is just putting 100 starting price, no additional capital added, and dividends are being reinvested in this strategy. With just $100 at the start of MSTY, which is the youngest of these funds, in February 22 and 2024, your MSTY would be worth $333. If you did the same strategy for MSTR, it would be worth almost $500. Whereas the S&P 500 VOO would only be 115. QQQ, the NASDAQ 100, would be 116. So the reason that you should not freak out per se in this kind of crazy strategy is really just because of this asset right here. MSTR is a company that has really just levered up and put Bitcoin as their main thing. They are kind of phasing out their software business or putting it on the back burner. And that's just because they really believe that Bitcoin is the future, at least in terms of scarce money, and at least in terms of digital money. Bitcoin is definitely the scarcest money we've ever had, and it's definitely the best digital money we've ever had. And with Michael Saylor doing stuff like this, holding all of this Bitcoin, it looks like, actually I can't see what his, oh, here it is. So here is the total value of MSTR's Bitcoin. It's 42.17 billion. They have almost 500,000 Bitcoin, and there are only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be mined or produced. There will never be more Bitcoin than that. And so you see, this strategy has pretty well benefited MSTR. It's definitely benefited MSTY holders. And this is also a kind of an interesting chart before we close. This is without dividend reinvestment. So this is just with $100 invested into MSTR versus $100 in MSTY versus 100 in VOO versus 100 in QQQ. This is what it looks like. MSTY is still beating QQQ and VOO if you invested at the start of the youngest fund. You would have almost 500 with MSTR. Your $100 invested in MSTY with no additional money put in would be $134. That's with all of those $27 siphoned out of the fund. It's still doing better than the market. So that was a lot of information, but that just goes to show why MSTY is such, like, it's just a bad boy. I mean, it just really does perform really well. The fund manager for MSTY does those calls pretty darn good. And I mean, just look at these dividends. Like, it's just so pleasant to put a very small amount of capital in and get stuff like this back out. Like, you can't get that anywhere else. And at the same time, like, have a chart that looks like this, where it's positive. Like, everybody else is going to have NAV bleed, is going to have this, just, it's going to look ugly if you try to pay that kind of dividend with almost any other underlying asset. And so that's why MSTY is definitely one of my favorites of the high yield investing world. And it does pay monthly. The next payday for MSTY is coming up on, let me see if I can find the date really quick. Let's look at, so I believe it is, I believe it's Group D. So Group D is going to be on, they're going to announce on the 15th, and they will pay on the 17th of this month. And so if you have no MSTY holding, it is going to be a higher risk kind of investment. It is going to go up enormously. It's going to go down enormously. But MSTY has paid for itself if you invested at its start in February of last year, faster than any one of these Yieldmax funds. And it's just performed so very well. And we just have one Bitcoin to thank and two Michael Saylor to thank for that performance, as well as the fund manager who's doing these calls. If you do have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for watching.